Spiritual Evolution articles by H.P. 6 Blavatsky. Practical Occultism. Occultism versus the occult arts. Spiritual progress is the desire to live selfish? Genius. H.P. Blavatsky. Series number 26. Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Ltd. Bangalore 560,004. Objects of the Theosophical movement. I. To form the nucleus of a universal brotherhood of humanity, without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. 2. The study of ancient and modern religions, philosophies, and sciences, and the demonstration of the importance of such study. And 3. The investigation of the unexplained laws of nature and the psychical powers latent in man. P.M. The articles of H.P. Blavatsky and W.Q. Judge, which originally appeared in the Theosophist, Lucifer, and the Path, were issued in pamphlet form by the Theosophy Company, Los Angeles, USA. For the benefit of students and inquirers in India, these are now being reprinted in an Indian edition. Reprint edition, 1985, IN, by courtesy, the Theosophy Company, 245, West 33rd St., Los Angeles, California. 90007, USA. Printed by V. N. Iyer at Commercial Printing House, 41/1, 3rd Main Road, Gandhinagar, Bangalore 560,009, and published by J. M. Tijoriwala for Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Limited, 4, Sir Krishna Rao Road, Basavangudi, Bangalore 560,004. Forward. In the second issue of Lucifer, for October 1, 887, H.P. Blavatsky took particular note of the mood of that time, finding evidence that occultism had passed beyond the region of careless amusement and entered that of serious inquiry. Inspection of 10 current periodicals revealed that all the various branches and short of the occult side of nature were becoming prominent in every kind of literature. Considering these signs of the times, she goes on to show that the trend described was far from an unmixed blessing. Much of this editorial is given to detailed warnings of the known effects of the black art of hypnotism. The accelerating spread of hypnotic practices, she said, marked the close of a psychic cycle, and indicated the shadowed appearance of the spirit of the occult, with all its associated dangers to the unprepared. The following spring, in Lucifer for April, 1888, she published an epoch-making article, Practical Occultism, with the subtitle Important to Students. Here the warnings were equally strong, although in another key. Now's addressed herself to theosophists concerning the extreme gravity of undertaking the path of occultism. With all the emphasis at her command, she pointed to the stringent moral requirements to be faced by the aspirant to occult knowledge. As the one responsible for bringing the possibility of such knowledge to light in the Western world, she stressed the risks involved. In May, the month following, she published 2 letters which illustrated the difficulty of readers in grasping the import of practical occultism. These letters, together with HPB's replies, are here printed immediately after Practical Occultism, together with a note she appended to a query which came to Lucifer over a year later. Also in Lucifer for May, 1888, Madame Blavatsky published a second article on occultism, Occultism versus the Occult Arts, in response, as she said, to the growing interest manifested by readers. Again the note of warning is paramount. HPB wrote, "It now seems clear, in anticipation of the practical inability of most Westerners to recognize the total commitment expected of aspirants to occult knowledge. She hoped by this means to spare those who would listen from suffering the terrible penalties which overtake would-be practitioners of magic who imagine they can make progress in this direction without either the necessary personal purity or self-sacrificing altruistic intent." Yet, along with the warnings, there emerges in both these articles a glorious ideal of human development which it was equally her purpose to suggest. Madame Blavatsky arrived in England in May, 1887. Only 4 years of her life remained, yet they made a period of almost incredible productivity during which she founded Lucifer, completed the secret doctrine, and wrote The Key to Theosophy and The Voice of the Silence. It was a cycle of intensified work, bringing an active response in both Europe and America. Her discussions of occultism in Lucifer spoke to this response. Yet the articles she had earlier put into print in the Theosophist sounded the same keynote and developed the foundation in both philosophy and doctrine for later expositions. In the Theosophist for July, 1884, her article, Is the Desire to Live Selfish?, answers questions aroused by the strange contents of the Elixir of Life, appearing in the two previous issues. In her elaboration of the meaning of statements made in this rather extraordinary treatise concerned with the practical laws of individual immortality, HPB illustrated the far-reaching purview of occult science in respect to the spiritual evolution of man. This is one of the few instances in which theosophical tenets are explained as they apply to highly progressed souls. The article, Spiritual Progress, which appeared in the Theosophist for May, 1885, shows how early in the history of the movement it became necessary to guard its philosophical appeal against the perversions of imitators promising to reveal, for a price, secrets of personal development. While the laws of inner growth form a part of the theosophical teaching, the Society, H.P.B. said, was founded to teach no new and easy paths to the acquisition of powers. Its only mission, she added, was to rekindle the torch of truth, so long extinguished for all but the very few, and to keep that truth alive by the formation of a fraternal union of mankind, the only soil in which the good seed can grow. The article, Genius, published in Lucifer for November 1, 1889, makes ethical attainment the indispensable foundation of any conception of human excellence and achievement. The account here provided of genius is necessary to any psychology worthy of the name, and the difference between higher and lower mind, and between their respective productions, is crucial to any sort of useful criticism concerning literature and the arts. The content of this discussion illuminates and is illuminated by two other articles by HPB: Civilization, the Death of Art and Beauty, and Is Theosophy a Religion?, both of which appeared in Lucifer. Practical Occultism important to students. As some of the letters in the correspondence of this month show, there are many people who are looking for practical instruction in occultism. It becomes necessary, therefore, to state once for all, a. the essential difference between theoretical and practical occultism, or what is generally known as theosophy on the one hand, and occult science on the other, and, b. the nature of the difficulties involved in the study of the latter. It is easy to become a theosophist. Any person of average intellectual capacities, and a leaning toward the metaphysical, a pure, unselfish life, who finds more joy in helping his neighbor than in receiving help himself, one who is ever ready to sacrifice his own pleasures for the sake of other people, and who loves truth, goodness and wisdom for their own sake, not for the benefit they may confer, is a theosophist. But it is quite another matter to put oneself upon the path which leads to the knowledge of what is good to do, as to the right discrimination of good from evil, a path which also leads a man to that power through which he can do the good he desires, often without even apparently lifting a finger. Moreover, there is one important fact with which the student should be made acquainted. Namely, the enormous, almost limitless, responsibility assumed by the teacher for the sake of the pupil. From the gurus of the East who teach openly or secretly, down to the few Kabbalists in Western lands who undertake to teach the rudiments of the sacred science to their disciples, those Western hierophants being often themselves ignorant of the danger they incur, one and all of these teachers are subject to the same inviolable law. From the moment they begin really to teach, from the instant they confer any power whether psychic, mental, or physical on their pupils, they take upon themselves all the sins of that pupil, in connection with the occult sciences, whether of omission or commission, until the moment when initiation makes the pupil a master and responsible in his turn. There is a weird and mystic religious law, greatly reverenced and acted upon in the Greek, half forgotten in the Roman Catholic, and absolutely extinct in the Protestant Church. It dates from the earliest days of Christianity and has its basis in the law just stated, of which it was a symbol and an expression. This is the dogma of the absolute sacredness of the relation between the godparents as sponsors for a child. 1. These tacitly take upon themselves all the sins of the newly baptized child, anointed, as at the initiation, a mystery truly, until the day when the child becomes a responsible unit, knowing good and evil. Thus it is clear why the teachers are so reticent, and why cellists are required to serve a 7 years probation to prove their fitness, and develop the qualities necessary to the security of both master and pupil. Occultism is not magic. It is comparatively easy to learn the trick of spells and the methods of using the subtler, but still material, forces of physical nature. The powers of the animal soul in man are soon awakened, the forces which his love, his hate, his passion, can call into operation, are readily developed. But this is black magic sorcery. For it is the motive, and the motive alone, which makes any exercise of power become black, malignant, or white, beneficent magic. It is impossible to employ spiritual forces if there is the slightest tinge of selfishness remaining in the operator. 4. Unless thine tension is entirely unalloyed, the spiritual will transform itself into the psychic, act on the astral plane, and dire results may be produced by it. The powers and forces of animal nature can equally be used by the selfish and revengeful, as by the unselfish and the all-forgiving. The powers and forces of spirit lend themselves only to the perfectly pure in heart, and this is divine magic. What are then the conditions required to become a student of the divine sapientia? For let it be known that no such instruction can possibly be given unless these certain conditions are complied with, and rigorously carried out during the years of study. This is a sine qua non. No man can swim unless he enters deep water. No bird can fly unless its wings are grown, and it has space before it and courage to trust itself to the air. A man who will wield a two-edged sword, must be a thorough master of the blunt weapon, if he would not injure himself or what is worse others, at the first attempt. 1. So holy is the connection thus formed deemed in the Greek Church, that a marriage between godparents of the same child is regarded as the worst kind of incest, is considered illegal and is dissolved by law, and this absolute prohibition extends even to the children of one of the sponsors as regards those of the other. To give an approximate idea of the conditions under which alone the study of divine wisdom can be pursued with safety, that is without danger that divine will give place to black magic, a page is given from the private rules, with which every instructor in the East is furnished. The few passages which follow are chosen from a great number and explained in brackets. 1. The place selected for receiving instruction must be a spot calculated not to distract the mind and filled with influence evolving, magnetic, objects. The 5 sacred colors gathered in a circle must be there among other things. The place must be free from any malignant influences hanging about in the air. The place must be set apart, and used for no other purpose. The 5 sacred colors are the prismatic hues arranged in a certain way, as these colors are very magnetic. By malignant influences are meant any disturbances through strifes, quarrels, bad feelings, etc., as these are said to impress themselves immediately on the astral light, i.e., in the atmosphere of the place, and to hang about in the air. This first condition seems easy enough to accomplish, yet on further consideration, it is one of the most difficult ones to obtain too. Before the disciple shall be permitted to study face to face, he has to acquire preliminary understanding in a select company of other lay upasaka, disciples, the number of whom must be odd. Face to face means in this instance a study independent or apart from others, when the disciple gets his instruction face to face either with himself, his higher divine self, or his guru. It is then only that each receives his due of information, according to the use he has made of his knowledge. This can happen only toward the end of the cycle of instruction. 3. Before thou, the teacher, shalt impart to thy lanu, disciple, the good, holy, words of Lamrin, or shall permit him to make ready for Dujj, thou shalt take care that his mind is thoroughly purified and at peace with all especially with his other selves. Otherwise the words of wisdom and of the good law, shall scatter and be picked up by the winds. Lamrin is a work of practical instructions, bites and kapa, in two portions, one for ecclesiastical and exoteric purposes, the other for esoteric use. Asterisk to make ready for dubj, is to prepare the vessels used for seership, such as mirrors and crystals. The other selves, refers to the fellow students. Unless the greatest harmony reigns among the learners, no success is possible. It is the teacher who makes the selections according to the magnetic and electric natures of the students, bringing together and adjusting most carefully the positive and the negative elements. 4. The upasaka while studying must take care to be united as the fingers on one hand. Thou shalt impress upon their minds that whatever hurts one should hurt the others, and if the rejoicing of one finds no echo in the breasts of the others, then the required conditions are absent, and it is useless to proceed. This can hardly happen if the preliminary choice made was consistent with the magnetic requirements. It is known that cellists otherwise promising and fit for the reception of truth, had to wait for years on account of their temper and the impossibility they felt to put themselves in tune with their companions. 4-5. The CO disciples must be tuned by the Guru as the strings of a lute, veena, each different from the others, yet each emitting sounds in harmony with all. Collectively they must form a keyboard answering in all its parts to thy lightest touch, the touch of the Master. Thus their minds shall open for the harmonies of wisdom, to vibrate as knowledge through each and all, resulting in effects pleasing to the presiding gods, tutelary or patron angels, and use full to the Lanug. So shall wisdom be impressed forever on their hearts and the harmony of the law shall never be broken. 6. Those who desire to acquire the knowledge leading to the cities, occult powers, have to renounce all the vanities of life and of the world. Here follows enumeration of the cities. 7. None can feel the difference between himself and his fellow students, such as I am the wisest, I am more holy and pleasing to the teacher, or in my community, than my brother, etc., and remain an upasaka. His thoughts must be predominantly fixed upon his heart, chasing therefrom every hostile thought to any living being. It, the heart, must be full of the feeling of its non-separateness from the rest of beings as from all in nature, otherwise no success can follow. 8. A lanug, disciple, has to dread external living influence alone, magnetic emanations from living creatures. For this reason while at one with all, in his inner nature, he must take care to separate his outer, external, body from every foreign influence. None must drink out of, or eat in his cup but himself he must avoid bodily contact, i.e. being touched or touch, with human, as with animal being. No pet animals are permitted and it is forbidden even to touch certain trees and plants. A disciple has to live, so to say, in his own atmosphere in order to individualize it for occult purposes. 9. The mind must remain blunt to all but the universal truths in nature, lest the doctrine of the heart should become only the doctrine of the eye, i.e., empty exoteric ritualism. 10. No animal food of whatever kind, nothing that has life in it, should be taken by the disciple. No wine, no spirits, or opium should be used, for these are like the lamavan, evil spirits, who fasten upon the unwary, they devour the understanding. Wine and spirits are supposed to contain and preserve the bad magnetism of all the men who helped in their fabrication, the meat of each animal, to preserve the psychic characteristics of its kind. 1-1. Meditation, abstinence anal, the observation of moral duties, gentle thoughts, good deeds and kind words, as goodwill to all and entire oblivion of self, are the most efficacious means of obtaining knowledge and preparing for the reception of higher wisdom. 12. It is only by virtue of a strict observance of the foregoing rules that a Lanu can hope to acquire in good time the cities of the Arhats. The growth which makes him become gradually one with the universal all. These 12 extracts are taken from amongst some 73 rules, to enumerate which would be useless, as they would be meaningless in Europe. But even these few are enough to show the immensity of the difficulties which beset the path of the would-be Upasaka, who has been born and bred in Western lands. 3. All Western, and especially English, education is instinct with principle of emulation and strife. Each boy is urged to learn more quickly, to outstrip his companions, and to surpass them in every possible way. What is miscalled friendly rivalry is assiduously cultivated, and the same spirit is fostered and strengthened in every detail of life with such ideas educated into him from his childhood. How to be it remembered that all chelas, even lay disciples, are called upasaka until after their first initiation, when they become lanu upasaka to that day. Even those who belong to lamaseries and are set apart, are considered as laymen. Can a Westerner bring himself to feel toward Cisco students? Asked Fingers on one hand. Those CO students, too, are not of his own selection, or chosen by himself from personal sympathy and appreciation. They are chosen by his teacher on far other grounds, and he who would be a student must first be strong enough to kill out in his heart all feelings of dislike and antipathy to others. How many Westerners are ready even to attempt this in earnest? And then the details of daily life, the command not to touch even the hand of one's nearest and dearest. How contrary to Western notions of affection and good feeling. How cold and hard it seems. Egotistical too, people would say, to abstain from giving pleasure to others for the sake of one's own development. Well, let those who think so defer, till another lifetime, the attempt to enter the path in real earnest. But let them not glory in their own fancied unselfishness. For, in reality, it is only the seeming appearances which they allow to deceive them, the conventional notions based in emotionalism and gush, or so-called courtesy, things of the unreal life, not the dictates of truth. But even putting aside these difficulties, which may be considered external, though their importance is none the less great, how are students in the West to attune themselves to harmony as here required of them? So strong has personality grown in Europe and America, that there is no school of artists even whose members do not hate and are not jealous of each other. Professione of hatred and envy have become proverbial, men seek each to benefit himself at all costs, and even the so-called courtesies of life are but a hollow mask covering these demons of hatred and jealousy. In the East, spirit of non-separateness is inculcated steadily from childhood up, as in the West the spirit of rivalry. Personal ambition, personal feelings and desires, are not encouraged to grow so rampant there. When the soil is naturally good, it is cultivated in the right way, and the child grows into a man in whom the habit of subordination of one's lower to one's higher self is strong and powerful. In the West, men think that their own likes and dislikes of other men and things are guiding principles for them to act upon, even when they do not make of them the law of their lives and seek to impose them upon others. Let those who complain that they have learned little in the Theosophical Society lay to heart the words written in an article in the Path for the last February. The key in each degree is the aspirant himself. It is not the fear of God which is the beginning of wisdom, but the knowledge of self which is wisdom itself. How grand and true appears, thus, to the student of occultism who has commenced to realize some of the foregoing truths, the answer given by the Delphic oracle to all who came seeking after occult wisdom, words repeated and enforced again and again by the wise Socrates: man, know thyself. Some correspondence. Practical Occultism. In a very interesting article in last month's number entitled Practical Occultism, it is stated that from the moment a master begins to teach a Kila, he takes on himself all the sins of that Kila in connection with the occult sciences until the moment when initiation makes the Kila a master and responsible in his turn. For the Western mind, steeped as it has been for generations in individualism, it is very difficult to recognize the justice and consequently the truth of this statement, and it is very much to be desired that some further explanations should be given for a fact which some few may feel intuitively but for which they are quite unable to give any logical reason. SE Editor's reply. The best logical reason for it is the fact that even in common daily life, parents, nurses, tutors and instructors are generally held responsible for the habits and future ethics of a child. The little unfortunate wretch who is trained by his parents to pick pockets in the streets is not responsible for the sin, but the effects of it fall heavily on those who have impressed on his mind that it was the right thing to do. Let us hope that the Western mind, although being steeped in individualism, has not become so dulled thereby as not to perceive that there would be neither logic nor justice were it otherwise. And if the molders of the plastic mind of the yet unreasoning child must be held responsible, in this world of effects, for his sins of omission and commission during his childhood and for the effects produced by their early training in after life, how much more the spiritual guru, the latter taking the student by the hand, leads him into, and introduces him to a world entirely unknown to the pupil. For this world is that of the invisible but ever potent causality, the subtle, yet never breaking thread that is the action, agent, and power of karma, and karma itself in the field of divine mind. Once acquainted with this, no adept can any longer plead ignorance in the event of even an action good and meritorious in its motive, producing as its result, since acquaintance with this mysterious realm gives the means to the occultist of foreseeing the two paths opening before every premeditated as unpremeditated action, and thus puts him in a position to know with certainty what will be the results in one or the other case. So long, then, as the pupil acts upon this principle, but is too ignorant to be sure of his vision and powers of discrimination, is it not natural that it is the guide who should be responsible for the sins of him whom he has led into those dangerous regions? Is there no hope? I think, after reading the conditions necessary for occult study given in the April number of Lucifer, that it would be as well for the readers of this magazine to give up all hopes of becoming occultists in Britain, except inside a monastery. I hardly think it possible that such conditions could ever be realized. In my future capacity of medical doctor, if the gods are so benign, the eighth condition would be quite exclusive. This is most unfortunate, as it seems to me that the study of occultism is peculiarly essential for a successful practice of the medical profession. 8. I have the following question to ask you, and will be glad to be favored with a reply through the medium of Lucifer. Is it possible to study occultism in Britain? Before concluding, I feel compelled to inform you that I admire your magazine as a scientific production, and that I really and truly classified along with Imitation of Christ among my textbooks of religion. David Crichton, Marischal College, Aberdeen. Editor's reply. This is a too pessimistic view to entertain. One may study with profit the occult sciences without rushing into the higher occultism. In the case of our correspondent especially, and in his future capacity of medical doctor, the occult knowledge by successful practice I mean, successful to everybody concerned, of simples and minerals, and the curative powers of certain things in nature, is far more important and useful than metaphysical and psychological occultism or theophany. And this he can do better by studying and trying to understand Paracelsus and the two Van Helmonts than by assimilating Patanjali and the methods of Taraka Raja Yoga. It is possible to study occultism, the occult sciences or arts is more correct, in Britain, as on any other point of the globe, though owing to the tremendously adverse conditions created by the intense selfishness that prevails in the country, and a magnetism which is repellent to a free manifestation of spirituality, solitude is the best condition for study. A subsequent note in Lucifer for June, 1889, HPB printed a editor questioning /he practicality of certain of the requirements of Keeliship, as given in Practical Occultism. She made the following reply in a footnote: Keeliship has nothing whatever to do with means of subsistence or anything of the kind, for a man can isolate his mind entirely from his body and its surroundings. Keeliship is a state of mind, rather than a life according to hard and fast rules on the physical plane. This applies especially to the earlier, probationary period, while the rules given in Lucifer for April last pertain properly to a later stage, thato-factual occult training and the development of occult powers and insight. These rules indicate, however, the mode of life which ought to be followed by all aspirants so far as practicable, since it is the most helpful to them in their aspirations. It should never be forgotten that occultism is concerned with the inner man, who must be strengthened and freed from the dominion of the physical body and its surroundings, which must become his servants. Hence the first and chief necessity of Keeliship is a spirit of absolute unselfishness and devotion to truth, then follow self-knowledge and self-mastery. The serial important, while outward observance of fixed rules of life is a matter of secondary moment. Occultism versus the occult arts one oft have heard, but ne'er believed till now. There are, who can by potent spells bend to their crooked purpose nature's laws. Milton I. In this month's correspondence several letters testify to the strong impression produced on some minds by our last month's article Practical Occultism. Such letters go far to prove and strengthen two logical conclusions. A. There are more well-educated and thoughtful men who believe in the existence of occultism and magic, the two differing vastly, than the modern materialist dreams of, and, B. That most of the believers, comprising many Theosophists, have no definite idea of the nature of occultism and confuse it with the occult sciences in general, the black art included. Their representations of the powers it confers upon man, and of the means to be used to acquire them areas varied as they fanciful. Some imagine that a master in the art, to show the way, is all that is needed to become a Zanoni. Others, that one ha but to cross the canal of Suez and go to India to bloom forth as a Roger Bacon or even a Count St. Germain. Many take for their ideal Margrave with he Severenuenjouth, and care little for the soul as the price paid for it. Not a few, mistaking which of Enderism pure and simple, for occultism through the yawning earth from Stygian gloom, call up the meager ghost to walks of light, and want, on the strength of these feet, to be regarded as full-blown adepts. Ceremonial magic according to the rules mockingly laid down by Eliphas Levi, is another imagined alter ego of the philosophy of the Arhatso fold. In short, the prisms through which occultism appears, tot Hosianocentov the philosophy, are as multicolored and varied as human fancy can make them. Will these candidates to wisdom and power feel very indignant if told the plain truth? It is not only useful, but it has now become necessary to disabuse most of them and before it is too late. This truth may be said in a few words: there are not in the West half a dozen among the fervent hundreds who call themselves occultists. Science they seek to master. With a few exceptions, they are all on the highway to sorcery. Let them restore some order in the chaos that reigns in their minds, before they protest against this statement. Let them first learn the true relation in which the occult sciences stand to occultism, and the difference between tetuo, and then feel wrathful if they still think themselves right. Meanwhile, let them learn that occultism differs from magic and other secret sciences as the glorious sun does from a rushlight, as the immutable and immortal spirit of man the reflection of the absolute, causeless and unknowable all differs from the mortal clay the human body in our highly civilized West, where modern languages have been formed, and words coined, in the wake of ideas and thoughts as happened with every tongue the more the latter became materialized in the cold atmosphere of Western selfishness and its incessant chase after the goods of this world, the less was there any need felt for the production of new terms to express that which was tacitly regarded as absolute and exploded superstition. Such words could answer only to ideas which a cultured man was scarcely supposed to harbor in his mind. Magic a synonym for jugglery, sorcery an equivalent for crass ignorance, and occultism, the sorry relic of crack-brained, medieval fire philosophers. Oft he Jacobomes and the St. Martins, are expressions believed more than amply sufficient to cover the holophile of thimble rigging. The aeroderms of contempt, and used generally only in reference to the dross and residues of the Dark Ages and its preceding eons of paganism. Therefore have we no terms in the English tongue to define and shade the difference between such abnormal powers, or the sciences that lead to the acquisition of them, with the nicety possible in the Eastern languages, preeminently the Sanskrit. What do the words miracle and enchantment, words identical in meaning after all, as both express the idea of producing wonderful things by breaking the laws of nature, as explained by the accepted authorities, convey to the minds of those who hear, or who pronounce them? A Christian breaking of the laws of nature, notwithstanding. While believing firmly in the miracles, because said to have been produced by God through Moses, will either scout the enchantments performed by Pharaoh's magicians, or attribute them to the devil. It is the latter whom our pious enemies connect with occultism, while their impious foes, the infidels, laugh at misses, magicians, and occultists, and would blush to give one serious thought to such superstitions. This, because there is no term in existence to show the difference, no words to express the lights and shadows and draw the line of demarcation between the sublime and the true, the absurd and the ridiculous. The latter are the theological interpretations which teach the breaking of the laws of nature by man, God, or devil, the former the scientific miracles and enchantments of Moses and the magicians in accordance with natural laws, both having been learned in all the wisdom of the sanctuaries, which were the royal societies of those days, and in true occultism. This last word is certainly misleading, translated as it stands from the compound word guptavidya, secret knowledge. But the knowledge of what? Some of the Sanskrit terms may help us. There are 4, out of the many other, names of the various kinds of esoteric knowledge or sciences given, even in the exoteric Puranas. There is, 1. Yajnavidya, knowledge of the occult powers awakened in nature by the performance of certain religious ceremonies and rites. 2. Mahavidya, the great knowledge the Magicoft Kabbalists and off Tantrika worship, often sorcery of the worst description. 3. Goyavidya, knowledge of the mystic powers residing in sound, ether, hence in the mantras, chanted prayers or incantations, and depending on the rhythm and melody used, in other words a magical performance based on knowledge of forces of nature and their correlation. And 4. Atmavidya, a term which is translated simply knowledge of the soul, true wisdom by the Orientalists, but which means far more. This last is the only kind of occultism that any theosophist who admires light on the path, and who would be wise and unselfish, ought to strive after. All the rest is some branch of the occult sciences, i.e., arts based on the knowledge of the ultimate essence of all things in the kingdoms of nature, such as minerals, plants, and animals, hence things pertaining to the realm of materia/nature. 1. The Yajna, say the Brahmins, exists from eternity, for it proceeded forth from the Supreme One, in whom it lay dormant from no beginning. It is the key to the Travidva, the thrice sacred science contained in the Rig verses, which teaches the yagas or sacrificial mysteries. The yajna exists as an invisible thing at all times. It is like the latent power of electricity in an electrifying machine, requiring only the operation of a suitable apparatus in order to be elicited. It is supposed to extend from the ahavaniyat or sacrificial fire to the heavens, forming a bridge or ladder by means of which the sacrificer can communicate with the world of gods and spirits, and even ascend when alive to their abodes. Martin Hogg's Itareya Brahmana. This yajna is again one of the forms of the akasa, and the mystic word calling it into existence and pronounced mentally by the initiated priest is the lost word receiving impulse through willpower. Isis unveiled, Vol. IINTR. See Itareya Brahmana. Hogg. However invisible that essence may be, and howsoever much it has hitherto eluded the grasp of science, alchemy, astrology, occult physiology, chiromancy, exist in nature, and the exact sciences, perhaps so called, because they are found in this age of paradoxical philosophies, the reverse, have already discovered not a few of the secrets of the above arts. But clairvoyance, symbolized in India as the eye of Siva, called in Japan, infinite vision, is not hypnotism, the illegitimate son of mesmerism, and is not to be acquired by such arts. All the others may be mastered and results obtained, whether good, bad or indifferent, but Atmavidya sets small value on them. It includes them all and may even use them occasionally, but it does so after purifying them of their dross, for beneficent purposes, and taking care to deprive them of every element of selfish motive. Let us explain. Any man or woman can set himself or herself to study one or all of the above specified occult arts without any great previous preparation, and even without adopting any too restraining mode of life. One could even dispense with any lofty standard of morality. In the last case, of course, 10 to 1 the student would blossom into a very decent kind of sorcerer, and tumble down headlong into black magic. But what can this matter? The Voodoos and the Dugpas eat, drink and are merry over hecatombs of victims of their infernal arts, and so do the amiable gentlemen vivisectionists and the diploma-ed hypnotizers of the faculties of medicine, the only difference between the two classes being that the Voodoos and Dugpas are conscious, and the Charcot Richer-Crew unconscious. Sorcerers. Thus, since both have to reap the fruits of their labors and achievements in the black art, the Western practitioners should not have the punishment and reputation without the profits and enjoyments they may get therefrom. For we say it again, hypnotism and vivisection as practiced in such schools, are sorcery pure and simple, minus a knowledge that the Voodoos and Dugpas enjoy, and which no Charcot Trichet can procure for himself in 50 years of hard study and experimental observation. Let then those who will dabble in magic, whether they understand its nature or not, but who find the rules imposed upon students too hard, and who, therefore lay Atmavidya or occultism aside, go without it. Let them become magicians by all means, even though they do become Voodoos and Dugpas for the next 10 incarnations. But the interest of our readers will probably center on those who are invincibly attracted towards the occult, yet who neither realize the true nature of what they aspire towards, nor have they become passion-proof, far less truly unselfish. How about these unfortunates, we shall be asked, who are thus rent in twain by conflicting forces? For it has been said too often to need repetition, and the fact itself is patent to any observer, that when once the desire for occultism has really awakened in a man's heart, there remains for him no hope of peace, no place of rest and comfort in all the world. He is driven out into the wild and desolate spaces of life by an ever-gnawing unrest he cannot quell. His heart is too full of passion and selfish desire to permit him to pass the golden gate, he cannot find rest or peace in ordinary life. Must he then inevitably fall into sorcery and black magic, and through many incarnations sheep up for himself a terrible karma? Is there no other road for him? Indeed there is, we answer. Let him aspire to no higher than he feels able to accomplish. Let him not take a burden upon himself too heavy for him to carry. Without ever becoming a Mahatma, a Buddha or a great saint, let him study the philosophy and science of soul, and he can become one of the modest benefactors of humanity, without any superhuman powers. Siddhis, or the Arhat powers, are only for those who are able to lead life, to comply with the terrible sacrifices required for such a training, and to comply with them to the very letter. Let them know at once and remember always, that true occultism or theosophy is the great renunciation of self, unconditionally and absolutely, in thought as in action. It is altruism, and it throws him who practices it out of calculation of the ranks of the living altogether. Not for himself, but for the world, he lives, as soon as he has pledged himself to the work. Much is forgiven during the first years of probation. But, no sooner is he accepted than his personality must disappear, and he has to become a mere beneficent force in nature. There are two poles for him after that, two paths, and no midward place of rest. He has either to ascend laboriously, step by step, often through numerous incarnations and no devachanic break, the golden ladder leading to Mahatmaship, the Arhat or Bodhisattva condition, or he will let himself slide down the ladder at the first false step, and roll down into Dugpaship. All this is either unknown or left out of sight altogether. Indeed, one who is able to follow the silent evolution of the preliminary aspiration soft he candidates, often finds strange ideas quietly taking possession of their minds. There are those whose reasoning powers have been so distorted by foreign influences that they imagine that animal passions can be so sublimated and elevated that their fury, force, and fire can, so to speak, be turned inwards, that they can be stored and shut up in one's breast, until their energy is, not expanded but turned toward higher and more holy purposes, namely, until their collective and unexpanded strength enables their possessor to enter the true sanctuary of the soul, and stand therein in the presence of the Master, the higher self. For this purpose they will not struggle with their passions nor slay them. They will simply, by a strong effort of will put down the fierce flames and keep them at bay within their natures, allowing the fire to smolder under a thin layer of ashes. They submit joyfully to the torture of the Spartan boy who allowed the fox to devour his entrails rather than part with it. Oh, poor blind visionaries! As well hope that a band of drunken chimney sweeps, hot and greasy from their work, may be shut up in a sanctuary hung with pure white linen, and that instead of soiling and turning it by their presence into a heap of dirty shreds, they will become masters in and of the sacred recess, and finally emerge from it as immaculate as that recess. Why not imagine that a dozen of skunks imprisoned in the pure atmosphere of Adganpa, a monastery, can issue out of it impregnated with all the perfumes of the incenses used? Strange aberration of the human mind! Can it be so? Let us argue. The master in the sanctuary of Ursals is the higher self, the divine spirit whose consciousness is based upon and derived solely, at any rate during the mortal life of the man in whom it is captive, from the mind, which we have agreed to call the human. 5. The spiritual Suef being the vehicle of the spirit, in is turn the former, the personal or human soul, is a compound in its highest form, of spiritual aspirations, volitions, and divine love, and in its lower aspect, of animal desires and terrestrial passions imparted to it by its associations with its vehicle, the seat of all these. It thus stands as a link and a medium between the animal nature of man which its higher reason seeks to subdue, and his divine spiritual nature to which it gravitates, whenever it has the upper hand in its struggle with the inner animal. The latter is the instinctual animal soul and is the hotbed of those passions, which, as just shown, are lulled instead of being killed, and locked up in their breasts by some. Occultism versus the occult arts. One oft have heard, but ne'er believed till now, there are, who can by potent spells bend to their crooked purpose nature's laws. Milton I. In this month's correspondence several letters testify to the strong impression produced on some minds by our last month's article Practical Occultism. Such letters go far to prove and strengthen two logical conclusions. A. There are more well-educated and thoughtful men who believe in the existence of occultism and magic, the two differing vastly, than the modern materialist dreams of, and, B. That most of the believers, comprising many theosophists, have no definite idea of the nature of occultism and confuse it with the occult sciences in general, the black art included. Their representations of the powers it confers upon man, and of the means to be used to acquire them areas varied as they are fanciful. Some imagine that a master in the art, to show the way, is all that is needed to become a Zanoni. Others, that one ha but to cross the canal of Suez and go to India to bloom forth as a Roger Bacon or even a Count St. Germain. Many take for their ideal Margrave with he Severenouenjouth, and care little for the soul as the price paid for it. Not a few, mistaking Witchuvendism pure and simple, for occultism through the yawning earth from Stygian gloom, call up the meager ghost to walks of light, and want, on the strength of these feet, to be regarded as full-blown adepts. Ceremonial magic according to the rules mockingly laid down by Eliphas Levi, is another imagined alter ego of the philosophy of the Arhatso fold. In short, the prisms through which occultism appears, tot Hosianocentov the philosophy, are as multicolored and varied as human fancy can make them. Will these candidates to wisdom and power feel very indignant if told the plain truth? It is not only useful, but it has now become necessary to disabuse most of them and before it is too late. This truth may be said in a few words: there are not in the West half a dozen eminent fervent hundreds who call themselves occultists. How then can it be thought possible for a man to enter the strait gate of occultism when his daily and hourly thoughts are bound up with worldly things, desirous of possession and power, with lust, ambition, and duties, which, however honorable, are still of the earthy? Even the love for wife and family the purest, as the most unselfish of human affections, is a barrier to real occultism. For whether we take as an example the holy love of a mother for her child, or that of a husband for his wife, even in these feelings, when analyzed to the very bottom, and thoroughly sifted, there is still selfishness in the first, and an agonisma ado in the second instance. What mother would not sacrifice without a moment's hesitation hundreds of thousands of lives for that of the child of her heart? And what lover or true husband would not break the happiness of every other man and woman around him to satisfy the desire of one whom he loves? This is but natural, we shall be told. Quite so, in the light of the code of human affections, less so, in that of divine universal love. For, while the heart is full of thoughts for a little group of selves, near and dear to us, how shall the rest of mankind fare in our souls? What percentage of love and care will there remain to bestow on the great orphan? And how shall the still small voice make itself heard in a soul entirely occupied with its own privileged tenets? What room is there left for the needs of humanity and block to impress themselves upon, or even receive a speedy response? And yet, he who would profit by the wisdom of the universal mind, has to reach it through the wail of humanity without distinction of race, complexion, religion, or social status. It is altruism, not egoism even in its most legal and noble conception, that can lead the unit to merge its little self in the universal selves. It is to r/is needs and to this work that the true disciple of true occultism has to devote himself, if he would obtain r/Theosophy, divine wisdom and knowledge. The aspirant thastitches absolutely between the life of the world and the life of occultism. It is useless and vain to endeavor to unite the two, for no one can serve two masters and satisfy both. No one can serve his body and the higher soul, and do his family duty and his universal duty, without depriving either one or the other of its rights, for he will either lend his ear to the still small unable to perceive the metaphysical meaning. Man is a trinity composed of body, soul, and spirit, but man is nevertheless one, and is surely not his body. It is the latter which is the property, the transitory clothing of the man. The three egos are man in his three aspects on the astral, intellectual, or psychic, and the spiritual planes, or states. Voice and fail to hear the cries of his little ones, or, he will listen but to the wants of the latter and remain deaf to the voice of humanity. It would be a ceaseless, a maddening struggle for almost any married man, who would pursue true practical occultism, instead of its theoretical philosophy. For he would find himself ever hesitating between the voice of the impersonal divine love of humanity, and that of the personal, terrestrial love, and this could only lead him to fail in one or the other, or perhaps in both his duties. Worse than this. For, whoever indulges after having pledged himself to occultism in the gratification of a terrestrial love or lust, must feel an almost immediate result, that of being irresistibly dragged from the impersonal divine state down to the lower plane of matter. Sensual, or even mental self-gratification, involves the immediate loss of the powers of spiritual discernment. The voice of the master can no longer be distinguished from that of one's passions or even that of a dogma, the right from wrong, sound morality from mere casuistry. The Dead Sea fruit assumes the most glorious mystic appearance, only to turn to ashes on the lips, and to gall in the heart, resulting in depth ever deepening, darkness darkening still, folly for wisdom, guilt for innocence, anguish for rapture, and for hope despair. And once being mistaken and having acted on their mistakes, most men shrink from realizing their error, and thus descend deeper and deeper into the mire. And, although it is the intention that decides primarily whether white or black magic is exercised, yet the results even of involuntary, unconscious sorcery cannot fail to be productive of bad karma. Enough has been said to show that sorcery is any kind of evil influence exercised upon other persons, who suffer, or make other persons suffer, in consequence. Karma is a heavy stone splashed in the quiet waters of life, and it must produce ever-widening circles of ripples, carried wider and wider, almost ad infinitum. Such causes produced have to call forth effects, and these are evidenced in the just laws of retribution. Much of this may be avoided if people will only abstain from rushing into practices neither the nature nor importance of which they understand. No one is expected to carry a burden beyond his strength and powers. There are natural-born magicians, mystics and occultists by birth, and by right of direct inheritance from a series of incarnations and eons of suffering and failures. These are: is the desire to live selfish? He passage, to live, to live, to live must be the unswerving resolve, occurring in the article on the elixir of life, published in the March and April numbers of Vol. Ill of the Theosophist, is often quoted, by superficial readers unsympathetic with the Theosophical Society as an argument that the above teaching of occultism is the most concentrated form of selfishness. In order to determine whether the critics are right or wrong, the meaning of the word selfishness must first be ascertained. According to an established authority, selfishness is that exclusive regard to one's own interest or happiness, that supreme self-love or self-preference which leads a person to direct his purposes to the advancement of his own interest, power, or happiness, without regarding those of others. In short, an absolutely selfish individual is one who cares for himself and none else, or, in other words, one who is so strongly imbued with a sense of importance of his own personality that to him it is the acme of all his thoughts, desires and aspirations, and beyond that all is a perfect blank. Now, can an occultist be then said to be selfish when he desires to live in the sense in which that word is used by the writer of the article on the elixir of life? It has been said over and over again that the ultimate end of every aspirant after occult knowledge is nirvana or mutti, when the individual, freed from all Mayavikyopati, becomes one with Paramatma, or the Son identifies himself with the Father in Christian phraseology. For that purpose, every veil of illusion which creates a sense of personal isolation, a feeling of separateness from the all, must be torn asunder, or, in other words, the aspirant must gradually discard all sense of selfishness with which we are all more or less affected. A study of the law of cosmic evolution teaches us that the higher the evolution, the more does it tend towards unity. In fact, unity is the ultimate possibility of nature, and those who through vanity and selfishness go against her purposes, cannot but incur the punishment of total annihilation. The occultist thus recognizes that unselfishness and a feeling of universal philanthropy are the inherent. See Hristina Rossetti's well-known lines, "Does the road wind uphill all the way? Yes, to the very end. Does the journey take the whole long day? From morn to night, my friend." Are like an epitome of the life of those who are truly treading the path which leads to higher things. Whatever differences are to be found in the various presentations of esoteric doctrine, as in every age it donned a fresh garment, different both in hue and texture to that which preceded, yet in every one of them we find the fullest agree. Meant upon one point the road to spiritual development. One only inflexible rule has been ever binding upon the neophyte, as it is binding now, the complete subjugation of the lower nature by the higher. From the Vedas and Upanishads to the recently published Light on the Path, search as we may through the Bibles of every race and cult, we find but one only way, hard, painful, troublesome, by which men can gain the true spiritual insight. And how can it be otherwise, since all religions and all philosophies are but the variants of the first teachings of the one wisdom, imparted to men at the beginning of the cycle by the planetary spirit? The true adept, the developed man, must, we are always told, become he cannot be made. The process is therefore one of growth through evolution, and this must necessarily involve a certain amount of pain. The main cause of pain lies in our perpetually seeking the permanent in the impermanent, and not only seeking, but acting as if we had already found the unchangeable in a world of which the one certain quality we can predicate is constant change, and always, just as we fancy we have taken a firm hold upon the permanent, it changes within our very grasp, and pain results. Again, the idea of growth involves also the idea of disruption. The inner being must continually burst through its confining shell or encasement, and such a disruption must also be accompanied by pain, not physical but mental and intellectual. And this is how it is, in the course of our lives. The trouble that comes upon us is always just the one we feel to be the hardest that could possibly happen. It is always the one thing we feel we cannot possibly bear. If we look at it from a wider point of view, we shall see that we're trying to burst through our shell at its one vulnerable point, that our growth, to be real growth, and not the collective result of a series of excrescences, must progress evenly throughout, just as the body of a child grows, not first the head and then a hand, followed perhaps by a leg, viewed in all directions at once, regularly and imperceptibly. Man's tendency is to cultivate each part separately, neglecting the others, and the meantime every crushing pain is caused by the expansion of some neglected part, which expansion is rendered more difficult by the effects of the cultivation bestowed elsewhere. Evil is often the result of over-anxiety, and men are always trying to do too much. They are not content to leave well alone, to do always just what the occasion demands and no more. They exaggerate every action and so produce karma to be worked out in a future birth. One of the subtlest forms of this evil is the hope and desire of reward. Many there are who, albeit often unconsciously, are yet spoiling all their efforts by entertaining this idea of reward, and allowing it to become an active factor in their lives, and so leaving the door open to anxiety, doubt, fear, despondency, failure. The goal of the aspirant for spiritual wisdom is entrance upon a higher plane of existence. He is to become a new man, more perfect in every way than he is at present, and if he succeeds, his capabilities and faculties will receive a corresponding increase of range and power, just as in the visible world we find that each stage in the evolutionary scale is marked by increase of capacity. This is how it is that the adept becomes endowed with marvelous powers that have been so often described, but the main point to be remembered is, that these powers are the natural accompaniments of existence on a higher plane of evolution, just as the ordinary human faculties are the natural accompaniments of existence on the ordinary human plane. Many persons seem to think that adeptship is not so much the result of radical development as of additional construction. They seem to imagine that an adept is a man, who, by going through a certain plainly defined course of training, consisting of minutiation to a set of arbitrary rules, acquires first one power and then another, and when he has attained a certain number of these powers is forthwith dubbed an adept. Acting on this mistaken idea, they fancy that the first thing to be done towards attaining adeptship is to acquire powers. Clairvoyance and the power of leaving the physical body and traveling to a distance are among those which fascinate the most. To those who wish to acquire such powers for their own private advantage, we have nothing to say. They fall under the condemnation of all who act for purely selfish ends. But there are others, who, mistaking effect for cause, honestly think that the acquirement of abnormal powers is the only road to spiritual advancement. These look upon our society as merely the readiest means to enable them to gain knowledge in this direction, considering it as a sort of occult academy, an institution established to afford facilities for the instruction of would-be miracle workers. In spite of repeated protests and warnings, there are some minds in whom this notion seems ineradicably fixed, and they are loud in their expressions of disappointment when they find that what had been previously told them is perfectly true, that the society was founded to teach no new and easy paths to the acquisition of powers, and that its only mission is to rekindle the torch of truth, so long extinguished for all but the very few, and to keep that truth alive by the formation of a fraternal union of mankind, the only soil in which the good seed can grow. The Theosophical Society does indeed desire to promote the spiritual growth of every individual who comes within its influence, but its methods are those of the ancient rishis. Its tenets those of the oldest esotericism. It is no dispenser of patent nostrums composed of violent remedies which no honest dealer would dare to use. In this connection we would warn all our members, and others who are seeking spiritual knowledge, to beware of persons offering to teach them easy methods of acquiring psychic gifts. Such gifts, Laukika, are indeed comparatively easy of acquirement by artificial means, but fade out as soon as the nerve stimulus exhausts itself. The real seership and adeptship which is accompanied by true psychic development, Lokasra, once reached, is never lost. It appears that various societies have sprung into existence since the foundation of the Theosophical Society, profiting by the interest the latter has awakened in matters of psychic research, and endeavoring to gain members by promising them easy acquirement of psychic powers. In India we have long been familiar with the existence of hosts of sham ascetics of all descriptions, and we fear that there is fresh danger and hysterection, here, as well as in Europe and America. We only hope that none of our members, dazzled by brilliant promises, will allow themselves to be taken in by self-deluded dreamers, or, it may be, willful deceivers. To show that some real necessity exists for our protests and warnings, we may mention that we have recently seen, enclosed in a letter from Benares, copies of an advertisement put forth by a so-called Mahatma. Heckles for 8 men and women walk no English and any of the Indian vernaculars well, and concludes by saying that those who want to know particulars of the work and the amount of pay should apply to his address, with enclosed postage stamps. Upon the table before us lies a reprint of the Divine Pymander, published in England last year, and which contains a notice to Theosophists who may have been disappointed in their expectations of sublime wisdom being freely dispensed by Hindu Mahatmas, cordially inviting them to send in their names to the editor, who will see them, after a short probation, admitted into an occult brotherhood who teach freely and without reserve all they find worthy to receive. Strangely enough we find in the very volume in question Hermes Trismegisto saying, "Herein is the only way which leads to truth, which, indeed, our ancestors trod, and by which they arrived at the attainment of the good. This way is beautiful and even, nevertheless, it is difficult for the soul to walk therein so long as she is immured within the prison of the body. Therefore, abstain from the crowd, so that by means of ignorance the vulgar may be kept within bounds, even through fear of the unknown. It is perfectly true that some Theosophists have been, through nobody's fault but their own, greatly disappointed because we have offered them no short-cut to Yoga Vidya, and there are others who wish for practical work. And, significantly enough, those who have done least for the society are loudest in fault-finding. Now, why do not these persons and all our members who are able to do so, take up the serious study of mesmerism? Mesmerism has been called the key to the occult sciences. And it has this advantage that it offers peculiar opportunities for doing good to mankind. If in each of our branches we were able to establish a homeopathic dispensary with the addition of mesmerisling, such as has already been done with great success in Bombay, we might contribute towards putting the science of medicine in this country on a sounder basis, and be the means of incalculable benefit to the people at large. There are others of our branches, besides the one at Bombay, that have done good work in this direction, but there is room for infinitely more to be done than has yet been attempted. And the same is the case in the various other departments of the Society's work. It would be a good thing if the members of each branch would put their heads together and seriously consult as to what tangible steps they can take to further the declared objects of the Society. In too many cases the members of the Theosophical Society content themselves with a somewhat superficial study of its books, without making any real contribution to its active work. If the Society is to be a power for good in this and other lands, it can only bring about this result by the active cooperation of every one of its members, and we would earnestly appeal to each of them to consider carefully what possibilities of work are within his power, and then to earnestly set about carrying them into effect. Right thought is a good thing, but thought alone does not count for much unless it is translated into action. There is not a single member in the Society who is not able to do something to add the cause of truth and universal brotherhood. It only depends on his own will, to make that something an accomplished fact. Above all we would reiterate the fact that society is no nursery for incipient adepts. Teachers cannot be provided to go round and give instruction to various branches on the different subjects which come within the Society's work of investigation. The branches must study for themselves, books are to be had, and the knowledge there put forth must be practically applied by the various members. Thus will be developed self-reliance and reasoning powers. We urge this strongly, for appeals have reached us that any lecturer sent to branches must be practically versed in experimental psychology and clairvoyance, looking into magic mirrors and dreading the future, etc., etc. Now we consider that such experiments should originate amongst members themselves to be of any value in the development of the individual or to enable him to make progress in his uphill path, and therefore earnestly recommend our members to try for themselves. Is the desire to live selfish? The passage, to live must be thunswerving resolve, occurring in the article on the elixir of life, published in the March and April numbers of Vol. Il of the Theosophist, is often quoted, by superficial readers unsympathetic with the Theosophical Society, as an argument that the above teaching of occultism is the most concentrated form of selfishness. In order to determine whether the critics are right or wrong, the meaning of the word selfishness must first be ascertained. According to an established authority, selfishness is that exclusive regard to one's own interest or happiness, that supreme self-love or self-preference which leads a person to direct his purposes to the advancement of his own interest, power, or happiness, without regarding those of others. In short, an absolutely selfish individual is one who cares for himself and none else, or, in other words, one who is so strongly imbued with a sense of importance of his own personality that to him it is the acme of all his thoughts, desires and aspirations, and beyond that all is a perfect blank. Now, can an occultist be then said to be selfish when he desires to / vain he sense in which that word is used by the writer of the article on the elixir of life? It has been said over and over again that the ultimate end of every aspirant after occult knowledge is nirvana or mutti, when the individual, freed from all Mayavikyopati, becomes one with Paramatma, or the Son identifies himself with the Father in Christian phraseology. For that purpose, every veil of illusion which creates a sense of personal isolation, a feeling of separateness from the all, must be torn asunder, or, in other words, the aspirant must gradually discard all sense of selfishness with which we are all more or less affected. A study of the law of cosmic evolution teaches us that the higher the evolution, the more does it tend towards unity. In fact, unity is the ultimate possibility of nature, and those who through vanity and selfishness go against her purposes, cannot but incur the punishment of total annihilation. The occultist thus recognizes that unselfishness and a feeling of universal philanthropy are inherent. Of selfishness forged upon us by Maya. The struggle then between good and evil, God and Satan, Suras and Asuras, Devas and Daitwas, which is mentioned in the sacred books of all the nations and races, symbolizes the battle between unselfishness and the selfish impulses, which takes place in a man, who tries to follow the higher purposes of nature, until the lower animal tendencies, created by selfishness, are completely conquered, and the enemy thoroughly routed and annihilated. It has also been often put forth in various theosophical and other occult writings that the only difference between an ordinary man who works along with nature during the course of cosmic evolution and an occultist, is that the latter, by his superior knowledge, adopts such methods of training and discipline as will hurry on that process of evolution, and he thus reaches in a comparatively very short time that apex to ascend to which the ordinary individual may take perhaps billions of years. In short, in a few thousand years he approaches that form of evolution which ordinary humanity will attain to perhaps in the 6th or the 7th round during the process of Manvantara, i.e., cyclic progression. It is evident that the average man cannot become a Mahatma in one life, or rather in one incarnation. Now those, who have studied the occult teachings concerning Dvachan and our after states, will remember that between two incarnations there is a considerable period of subjective existence. The greater the number of such devachanic periods, the greater is the number of years over which this evolution is extended. The chief aim of the occultist is therefore to so control himself as to be able to control his future states, and thereby gradually shorten the duration of his devachanic states between his two incarnations. In his progress, there comes a time when, between one physical death and his next rebirth, there is no devachan but a kind of spiritual sleep, Theshak of death, having, so to say, stunned him into a state of unconsciousness from which he gradually recovers to find himself reborn, to continue his purpose. The period of the sleep may vary from 25 to 200 years, depending upon the degree of his advancement. But even this period may be said to be a waste of time, and hence all his exertions are directed to shorten its duration so as to gradually come to a point when the passage from one state of existence into another is almost imperceptible. This is his last incarnation, as it were, for the shock of death no more stuns him. This is the idea the writer of the article on the elixir of life means to convey, when he says, by or about the time when the death limit of his race is passed he is actually dead, in the ordinary sense, that is to say, that he has relieved himself of all or nearly all such material particles as would have necessitated in disruption the agony of dying. He has been dying gradually the whole period of his initiation. The catastrophe cannot happen twice over. He has only spread over a number of years the mild process of dissolution which others endure from a brief moment to a few hours. The highest adept is in fact dead to, and absolutely unconscious of, the world. He is oblivious of its pleasures, careless of its miseries in so far as sentimentalism goes, for the stern sense of duty never leaves him blind to its very existence. The process of the emission and attraction of atoms, which the occultist controls, has been discussed at length in that article and in other writings. It is by these means that he gets rid gradually of all the old gross particles of his body, substituting for them finer and more ethereal ones, till at last the former stula sarara is completely dead and disintegrated and he lives in a body entirely of his own creation, suited to his work. That body is essential for his purposes, for, as the elixir of life says, but to do good, as in everything else, a man must have time and materials to work with, and this is a necessary means to the acquirement of powers by which infinitely more good can be done than without them. When these are once mastered, the opportunities to use them will arrive. In another place, in giving practical instructions for that purpose, the same article says, the physical man must be rendered more ethereal and sensitive, the mental man more penetrating and profound, the moral man more self-denying and philosophical. The above important considerations are lost sight of by those who snatch away from the context the following passage in the same article, and from this account too, it will be perceptible how foolish it is for people to ask the Theosophists to procure for them communication with the highest adepts. It is with the utmost difficulty that one or two can be induced, even by the throes of a world, to injure their own progress by meddling with mundane affairs. The ordinary reader will say this is not godlike. This is the acme of selfishness. But let him realize that a very high adept, undertaking to reform the world, would necessarily have to once more submit to incarnation. And is the result of all that have gone before in that line sufficiently encouraging to prompt a renewal of the attempt? Now, in condemning the above passage as inculcating selfishness, superficial readers and thinkers lose sight of various important considerations. In the first place, they forget the other extracts already quoted which impose self-denial as a necessary condition of success, and which say that, with progress, new senses and new powers are acquired with which infinitely more good can be done than without them. The more spiritual the adept becomes, the less can he meddle with mundane, gross affairs and the more he has to confine himself to a spiritual work. It has been repeated, time out of number, that the work on a spiritual plane is as superior to the work on an intellectual plane as the one on the latter plane is superior to that on a physical plane. The very high adepts, therefore, do help humanity, but only spiritually. They are constitutionally incapable of meddling with worldly affairs. But this applies only to very high adepts. There are various degrees of adeptship, and those of each degree work for humanity on the planes to which they may have risen. It is only the cellists that can live in the world, until they rise to a certain degree. And it is because the adepts do care for the world that they make their cellists live in and work for it, as many of those who study the subject are aware. Each cycle produces its own occultists who will be able to work for the humanity of those times on all the different planes, but when the adepts foresee that at a particular period the then humanity will be incapable of producing occultists for work on particular planes, for such Occasions they do provide by either giving up voluntarily their further progress and waiting in those particular degrees until humanity reaches that period, or by refusing to enter into nirvana and submitting to reincarnation in time to reach those degrees when humanity will require their assistance at that stage. And although the world may not be aware of the fact, yet there are even now certain adepts who have preferred to remain statu quo and refuse to take the higher degrees, for the benefit of the future generations of humanity. In short, as the adepts work harmoniously, since unity is the fundamental law of their being, they have as it were made a division of labor, according to which each works on the plane at that time allotted to him, for the spiritual elevation of us all, and the process of longevity mentioned in the elixir of life is only the means. To the end which, far from being selfish, is the most unselfish purpose for which a human being can labor. Lucifer, November 1889. Genius, genius. Thou gift of heaven, thou light divine. Amid what dangers art thou doomed to shine? Oft will the body's weakness check thy force. Oft damp thy vigor, and impede thy course, and trembling nerves compel thee to restrain thy nobler efforts to contend with pain, or want, sad guest. Crab among many problems hitherto unsolved in the mystery of mind, stands prominent the question of genius. Whence, and what is genius, its raison d'etre, the causes of its excessive rarity? Is it indeed a gift of heaven? And if so, why such gifts to one, and dullness of intellect, or even idiocy, the doom of another? To regard the appearance of men and women of genius as a mere accident, a prize of blind chance, or, as dependent on physical causes alone, is only thinkable to a materialist. As an author truly says, there remains then, only this alternative, to agree with the believer in a personal God, to refer the appearance of every single individual to a special act of divine will and creative energy, or to recognize, in the whole succession of such individuals, one great act of some will, expressed in an eternal inviolable law. Genius, as Coleridge defined it, is certainly to every outward appearance, at least the faculty of growth, yet to the inward intuition of man, it is a question whether it is genius an abnormal aptitude of mind that develops and grows, or the physical brain, its vehicle, which becomes through some mysterious process fitter to receive and manifest from within outwardly the innate and divine nature of man's oversoul. Perchance, in their unsophisticated wisdom, the philosophers of old were nearer truth than are our modern wiseacres, when they endowed man with a tutelar deity, a spirit whom they call genius. The substance of this entity, to say nothing of its essence, observe the distinction, reader, and the presence of both, manifests itself according to the organism of the person it informs. As Shakespeare says of the genius of great men, what we perceive of his substance is not here. For what you see is but the smallest part. But were the whole frame here, it is of such a spacious, lofty pitch, your roof were not sufficient to contain it. This is precisely what the esoteric philosophy teaches. The flame of genius is lit by no anthropomorphic hand, save that of one's own spirit. It is the very nature of spiritual entity itself, of our ego, which keeps on weaving the life-woofs and toth web of reincarnation on the loom of time, from the beginnings to the ends of the great life cycle. One this it is that asserts itself stronger than in theovirage man. Through its personality, so that what we call the manifestations of genius in a person, are only the more or less successful efforts of that ego to assert itself on the outward plane of its objective form, the man of clay, in the matter of fact, daily life of the latter. The egos of a Newton, Aeschylus, or a Shakespeare, are of the same essence and substance as the egos of a yokel, an ignoramus, a fool, or even an idiot, and the self-assertion of their informing genii depends on the physiological and material construction of the physical man. No ego differs from another ego, in its primordial or original essence and nature. That which makes one mortal a great man and of another a vulgar, silly person is, said, the quality and make-up of the physical shell or casing, and the adequacy or inadequacy of brain and body to transmit and give expression to the light of the real, inner man, and this aptness or inaptness is, in its turn, the result of karma. Or, to use another simile, physical man is the musical instrument, and the ego, the performing artist. The potentiality of perfect melody of sound, is in the former the instrument, and no skill off the latter can awaken a faultless harmony out of a broken or badly made instrument. This harmony depends on the fidelity of transmission, by word or act, to the objective plane, of the unspoken divine thought in the very depths of man's subjective or inner nature. Physical man may, to follow our simile, be a priceless Stradivarius or a cheap and cracked fiddle, or again a mediocrity between the two, in the hands of the Paganini who ensouls him. All ancient nations knew this. But though all had their mysteries and their hierophants, not all could be equally taught the great metaphysical doctrine, and while a few elect received such truths at their initiation, the masses were allowed to approach them with the period of one full manvantara composed of 7 rounds. The greatest caution, and only within the farthest limits off act from the divine all proceed the moon, the divine wisdom give it not to the unworthy, says a book of Hermes. Paul, the wise master builder */cor high, 10, but echoes thoth Hermes when telling the Corinthians, we speak wisdom among them that are perfect, the initiated. Divine wisdom in a mystery, even the hidden wisdom. Ibid, n. 7. Yet, to this day the ancients are accused of blasphemy and fetishism for their hero worship. But have the modern historians ever fathomed the cause of such worship? We believe not. Otherwise they would be the first to become aware that that which was worshipped, or rather that to which honors were rendered, was neither the man of clay, nor the personality, the hero or saint so and so, which still prevails on the Roman Church, a church which beatifies the body rather than the soul, but the divine imprisoned spirit, the exiled God within that personality. Who, in the profane world, is aware that even the majority of the magistrates, the archons of Athens, mistranslated in the Bible as princes, whose official duty it was to prepare the city for such processions, were ignorant of the true significance of the alleged worship. Verily was Paul right in declaring that we speak wisdom, not the wisdom of this world, which none of the archons of this profane world knew, but the hidden wisdom of the mysteries. For, as again the epistle of the apostle implies, the language of the initiates and their secrets no profane, not even an archon or ruler outside the fane of the sacred mysteries, know it, none save the spirit of man, the ego, which is in him. IH. V. N. Were chapters 2 and m of I Corinthians ever translated in the spirit in which they were written, even their dead letter is now disfigured, the world might receive strange revelations. Among other things, it would have a key to many hitherto unexplained rites of ancient paganism, one of which is the mystery of this same hero worship. And it would learn that if the streets of the city that honored one such man were strewn with roses for the passage of the hero of the day, if every citizen was called to bow in reverence to him who was so feasted, and if both priest and poet vied in their zeal to immortalize the hero's name after his death, occult philosophy tells us the reason why this was done. 1.1, to a term absolutely theurgic, Masonic and occult. Paul, by using it, declares himself an initiate, having the right to initiate others. Behold, it saith, in every manifestation of genius when combined with virtue, in the warrior or the bard, the great painter, artist, statesman, or man of science, who soars high above the heads of the vulgar herd, the undeniable presence of the celestial exile, the divine ego whose jailer thou art. O man of matter! Thus, that which we call deification applied to the immortal God within, not to the dead walls of the human tabernacle that contained him. And this was done in tacit and silent recognition of the efforts made by the divine captive who, under the most adverse circumstances of incarnation, still succeeded in manifesting himself. Occultism, therefore, teaches nothing new in asserting the above philosophical axiom. Enlarging upon the broad metaphysical truism, it only gives it a finishing touch by explaining certain details. It teaches, for instance, that the presence in man of various creative powers called genius in their collectivity is due to no blind chance. To know innate equalities through hereditary tendencies, though that which is known as atavism may often intensify these faculties, but to an accumulation of individual antecedent experiences of the ego in its preceding life, and lives. For, though omniscient in its essence and nature, it still requires experience through its personalities of the things of earth, earthy on the objective plane, in order to apply the fruition of that abstract omniscience to them, and, adds our philosophy, the cultivation of certain aptitudes throughout a long series of past incarnations must finally culminate in some one life, in a blooming forth as genius, in one or another direction. Great genius, therefore, if true and innate, and not merely an abnormal expansion of our human intellect, can never copy or condescend to imitate, but will ever be original, in its creative impulses and realizations. Like those gigantic Indian lilies that shoot out from the clefts and fissures of the cloud nursing, and bare rocks on the highest plateaus of the Nilgiri hills, true genius needs but an opportunity to spring forth into existence and blossom in the sight of all in the most arid soil, for its stamp is always unmistakable. To use a popular saying, innate genius, like murder, will out sooner or later, and the more it will have been suppressed and hidden, the greater will be the flood of light thrown by the sudden eruption. On the other hand, artificial genius, so often confused with the former, and which, in truth, is but the outcome of long studious and training, will never be more than, so to say, the flame of a lamp burning outside the portal of the fane. It may throw a long trail of light across the road, but it leaves the inside of the building in darkness. And, as every faculty and property in nature is dual, i.e., each may be medito servituo ens, evil as well as good, so will artificial genius betray itself. Born out of the chaos of terrestrial sensations, of perceptive and retentive faculties, yet of finite memory, it will ever remain the slave of its body, and that body, owing to its unreliability and the natural tendency of matter to confusion, will not fail to lead event greatest genius, so called, back into its own primordial element, which is chaos again, or evil, or earth. Thus between the true and the artificial genius, one born from the light of the immortal ego, the other from the evanescent will-o'-the-wisp of the terrestrial or purely human intellect and animal soul, there is a chasm, to be spanned only by him who aspires ever on ward, who never loses sight, even when in the depths of matter, of that guiding star, the divine soul and mind, or what we call buddhaya manas. The latter does not require, as does the former, cultivation. The words of the poet who asserts that the lamp of genius, if not protected, pruned, and fed with care, soon dies, or runs to waste with fitful glare, can apply only to artificial genius, the outcome of cultural and of purely intellectual acuteness. It is not the direct light of the Manasaputra, the sons of wisdom, for true genius lit at the flame of our higher nature, or the ego, cannot die. This is why it is so very rare. Lavater calculated that the proportion of genius, in general, to the vulgar, is likened to 1,000,000, but genius without tyranny, without pretension, that judges the weak with equity, the superior with humanity, and equals with justice, is like 1 in 10 millions. This is indeed interesting, though not too complementary to human nature, if, by genius, Lavater had in mind only the higher sort of human intellect, unfolded by cultivation, protected, pruned, and fed, and not the genius we speak of. Moreover, such genius is always apt to lead to the extremes of will or woe him through whom this artificial light of the terrestrial mind manifests. Like the good and bad genii of old with whom human genius is made so appropriately to share the name, it takes its helpless possessor by the hand and leads him, one day to the pinnacles of fame, fortune, and glory, but topplage him on the following day into an abyss of shame, despair, often of crime. But as according to the great physiognomist, there is more of the former than of the latter kind of genius in this our world, because, as occultism teaches us, it is easier for the personality with its acute physical senses and tatus to gravitate toward the lower quaternary thantaso ardoitstriad. Modern philosophy, though quite proficient in treating this lower place of genius, knows nothing of its higher spiritual form, the 1 in 10 millions. Thus it is only natural that confusing one with the other, the best modern writers should have failed to define true genius. As a consequence, we continually hear and read a good deal of that which to the occultist seems quite paradoxical. Genius requires cultivation, says one; genius is vain and self-sufficient, declares another, while a third will go on defining the divine light but to dwarf it on the Procrustean bed of his own intellectual narrow-mindedness. He will talk of the great eccentricity of genius, and allying it as a general rule with an inflammable constitution will even show it a prey to every passion but seldom delicacy of taste. Lord Kames. It is useless to argue with such, or tell them that, original, and great genius puts out the most dazzling rays of human intellectuality, as the sun quenches the flame light of a fire in an open field, that it is never eccentric, though always me in ruhan, that no man endowed with true genius can ever give way to his physical animal passions. In the view of an humble occultist, only such a grand altruistic character as that of Buddha or Jesus, and of their few close imitators, can be regarded, in our historical cycle, as fully developed genius. Hence, true genius has small chance indeed of receiving its due in our age of conventionalities, hypocrisy, and time-serving. As the world grows in civilization, it expense in fire see selfishness. And stonks its true prophets and geniuses for the benefit of its aping shadows, alanet surging masses off the ignorant millions, the great people's heart, are capable of sensing intuition ally a true great soul full of divine love for mankind, of godlike compassion for suffering man. Hence the populace alone is still capable of recognizing a genius, as without such qualities no man has a right to the name. No genius can be now found in church or state, and this is proven on their own admission. It seems a long time since in the 13th century the angelic doctor snubbed Pope Innocent IV, who, boasting of the millions got by him from the sale of absolutions and indulgences, remarked to Aquinas that the age of the church is past in which she said, "Silver and gold have I none." "True," was the ready reply, "but the age is also past when she could say to a paralytic, 'Rise up and walk.'" And yet from that time, and far, far earlier, to our own day the hourly crucifixion of their ideal master both by church and state has never ceased. While every Christian state breaks with its laws and customs, with every commandment given in these Sermon on the Mount, the Christian Church justifies and approves of this through her own bishops, who despairingly proclaim a Christian state impossible on Christian principles. Hence no Christ-like or Buddha-like way of life is possible in civilized states. The occultist then, to whom true genius is a synonym of self-existent and infinite mind, mirrored more or less faithfully by man, fails to find in the modern definition soft term anything approaching correctness. In its turn the esoteric interpretation of theosophy is sure to be received with derision. The very idea that every man with a soul in him is the vehicle of a genius will appear supremely absurd, even to believers, while the materialist will fall foul of it as a crass superstition. As to the popular feeling, the only approximately correct one because purely intuitional, it will not be even taken into account. The same elastic and convenient epithet superstition will once more be made to explain why there never was yet a universally recognized genius, whether of one or the other kind, without a certain amount of weird, fantastic and often uncanny tales and legends attaching themselves to so unique a character, dogging and even surviving him. Yet it is the unsophisticated alone, and therefore only the so-called uneducated masses, just because of that lack of sophistical reasoning in them, who feel, whenever coming in contact with an abnormal, out-of-the-way character, that there is in him something more than the mere mortal man, of flesh and intellectual attributes. And feeling themselves in the presence of that which in the enormous majority is ever hidden, of something incomprehensible to their matter or fact minds, they experience the same awe that popular masses felt in days of old, when their fancy, often more unerring than cultured reason, created of their heroes gods, teaching the weak to bend, the proud to pray to powers unseen and mightier than they. This is now called superstition. But what is superstition? True, we dread that which we cannot clearly explain to ourselves. Like children in the dark, we are all of us apt, the educated equally with the ignorant, to people that darkness with phantoms of our own creation, but these phantoms prove in no wise that darkness which is only another term for the invisible and the unseen is really empty of any presence save our own. So that if in its exaggerated form, superstition is a weird incubus, as a belief in things above and beyond our physical senses, yet it is also a modest acknowledgement that there are things in the universe, and around us, of which we know nothing. In this sense superstition becomes not an unreasonable feeling of half wonder and half dread, mixed with admiration and reverence, or with fear, according to the dictates of our intuition. And this is far more reasonable than to repeat with the two learned wiseacres that there is nothing whatever, in that darkness, nor can there be anything since they, the wiseacres, have failed to discern it. Per se muavk. Where there is smoke there must be fire, where there is a steamy vapor there must be water. Our claim rests but upon one eternal axiomatic truth, nihil sine causat. Genius and undeserved suffering, prove an immortal ego and reincarnation in a world. As for the rest, i.e., the obloquy and derision with which such theosophical doctrines are met, Fielding a sort of genius in his way, too has covered our answer over a century ago. Never did he utter a greater truth than on the day he wrote that / superstition makes a man a fool, skepticism makes him mad. Theosophical Literature is Unveiled, a master key to the mysteries of ancient and modern science and theology by H. P. Blavatsky Vol. I Science, XLV plus 628 pages. Vol. 2 Theology, 4 plus 640 pp. This exhaustive study of religion and science was Madame Blavatsky's first presentation of theosophy to the modern world. It is reproduced in photographic facsimile of the original edition, 1877, 2 volumes bound in one, cloth, complete with general index and supplementary topical index. American edition The Secret Doctrine, The Synthesis of Science, Religion, and Philosophy by H. P. Blavatsky Vol. I Cosmogenesis, Slay I plus 676 pages. Volume 2 Anthropogenesis, 14 plus 798 pages. A systematic development of theosophical teachings on cosmogenesis, anthropogenesis, symbolism, comparative religion, with extensive comparisons of ancient wisdom with scientific conceptions. Facsimile of original, 1888, edition, 2 volumes bound in one, cloth, complete with index, XXXPP. American edition index to The Secret Doctrine, all volume and page reference to the original edition, London 1888, and to the photographic facsimile reproduction, listed above. Reprint X plus 172 pages. American edition The Key to Theosophy, an exposition, in question and answer, of the ethics, science, and philosophy of theosophy by H. P. Blavatsky reprint of original edition, 1889, 15 plus 367 pages. Indian edition The Voice of the Silence, by H. P. Blavatsky, a blank verse rendition of chosen fragments from the Book of the Golden Precepts, belonging to the Contemplative or Mahayana, Yogacarya, school. Reprint of the original edition, 1889, 4 plus 79 pages, cloth. Indian edition Transactions of the Blavatsky Lodge, by H. P. Blavatsky reprint of the original, 1923, XXIV plus 149 pages, cloth. American edition A Modern Panarayan, by H. P. Blavatsky a collection of fugitive fragments. American edition The Ocean of Theosophy by William Q. Judge a comprehensive text on the theosophical philosophy by a co-founder of the theosophical movement widely used as a text in study classes. Reprint of original edition, 1893, 15 plus 182 pages. Indian edition The Bhagavad Gita rendered into English by William Q. Judge an ancient dialogue of philosophical religion from the Hindu epic, the Mahabharata. Cloth, 18 plus 133 pages. Indian edition notes on the Bhagavad Gita by W. Q. Judge. Indian edition letters that have helped me by W0JUDGE. American edition, and shorter Indian edition forum answers by William Q. Judge. Reprints from the Theosophical Forum. American edition. The Friendly Philosopher, compiled from letters and talks by Robert Crosby, 415 pages. Cloth. American edition. Universal Theosophy by Robert Crosby, Indian edition. 5 years of Theosophy essays selected from the Theosophist. American edition. Order from Theosophy Company, Mysore, Private Limited, 4. Sir Krishna Rao Road, Bangalore 560,004, India.